Hello and welcome. Fighting along the front line continues. Heavy attacks by both sides are defeated. So while there's no big territorial changes, we have a lot of information on the background about troop morale on both sides and about the big question, how much in cahoots is Hungary with Russia in this war? There are some disturbing informations coming in. Generally, in the situation in Ukraine is when it comes to air attacks that basically every day the Russian side launches strikes, mostly with Shahid, but also with S-300 surface to air missiles that are being used in ground attack, with Iskander caliber and other missiles that are being used. The effect of those strikes is likely very limited, but they are aimed at fixing Ukrainian air defenses far away from the front line by threatening the rear areas, command centers, etc., and thus depriving Ukrainian ground forces along the front line of effective air defense. We have new information about the dam. The New York Times has published a long article with a lot of new insights, talking to analysts and specialists that, for instance, there was a passageway under the dam. And according to most analysts, this was where the dam was mined. Also, the dam had a concrete bed in front of it. So even if the spillway was open for a long time, it shouldn't have been able to undermine the dam, which would exclude the collapse of the mine by negligence. But what it still doesn't answer is why the bridge we see here, while it was collapsing before the collapse of the dam itself. But that's a question that still has to be answered. In total, even this article doesn't say the Russians have deliberately blown it up, just that it indicates it. It's quite possible, for instance, that it was a mistake, that explosives that had been planted there just in case have been detonated without much without intent, as a mistake, as mining the dam itself in preparation to defeat a potential Ukrainian crossing of the Dnipro made military sense. If you expect the Ukrainians to cross over, to at least keep that option to blow up the dam, it makes perfect sense. So it makes sense that the explosives were there. Whether it made sense to blow them at exactly the point it was blown up is a completely different question. So according to the New York Times and the experts they have consulted with, the most likely reason for it is that Russian explosives inside of the dam have blown it up. We have news from the front line. The Ukrainians are reporting continued attacks. The Ukrainian side is reporting continued attacks, like we can see that here, along the line in Luhansk, north of the Siversky Donetsk. There are reports of attacks in Yampolivka, at Torske, Dibrova, and Rihorivka. I'll show it to you in a moment. What we see here is one of the Russian attacks that is being defeated. And according to the reports, after a little gained ground in the Serebryansk forest, the Russians have not advanced any further. And there are some videos with fairly gruesome pictures showing how high the losses have been. This was taken here. So basically east of Terny, northeast of Yampolivka, and I'll show it to you here in a moment. So basically somewhere here that should have been taken, that video was taken. The Russians are still attacking there, but it seems to be already faltering their attacks there. The clear intention is to create a diversionary attack to force the Ukrainians to redeploy reserves and to fix units there. South of the Siversky Donetsk, we also have reports about fighting. Spirne is now and then mentioned, Vesele, Orikhovo, Vasilivka, and especially the bulge in here. Berchivka and Yahitne is mentioned, as well as Klishivka, Kurdiumivka, and Osandrivka. There are no reported successes by either side. Mostly here the attacks are by the Ukrainians, but the front line has been stable for the last 24 to 48 hours. There is no report of additional changes along the front line. Fighting is also continuing around Avdiivka and Marinka. Also no confirmed no confirmed changes of in the possession of territory within the last hours. The Ukrainians are reporting additional attacks along the border between Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk, so they are still attacking here. The Russians claim they defeated several Ukrainian attacks, and that is more or less it. So we don't see any change in position of any change in positions or in the of any town being liberated or reoccupied. So right now the front line seems to be more or less stable while fighting is continuing. From the southern front line, and this fighting is basically continuing. We have it south of Fuliapole, we have Orikhiv, where the Ukrainians are also fighting, and we have the fighting that is continuing around Piatikhatki. Both sides are posting videos of destroyed enemy equipment in sizable amounts. Right now it seems a little difficult to seriously to fully assess which side is suffering more here. We see losses on both sides. We see that the Ukrainians are very likely still in control of Piatikhatki, even though there are some Russian sources claiming that they've recaptured it. I have not seen any visual evidence, so at least according to my analysis and my looking at the sources, Piatikhatki should still be in Ukrainian hands. There seems to have been some push in the direction of Sherebianki, but I cannot say that they have been successful in this regard. What we do have, though, are some changes in the Kahovka reservoir. What you see here is it's basically emptying out completely. We have different perspectives, how it's cleaning out. And here we see basically an white and white step. And this is showing, so while the width of the reservoir is gone, there's no cover and no concealment whatsoever on the ground here. It's a wide open plain. If we take Tatarigami, who is a Ukrainian officer, he says no, there are still water bodies on the way. The soil is not dry. Enemy has fortified positions along the shoreline since fall 2022, as well as artillery and mortars in the area. After the question is it possible to cross that desert? So according to most analysis, while it theoretically might open up an opportunity at some point, it is far from clear that it will be an easy path. The whole area is open. On the fortifications of the Russians along the shoreline have never been touched. The flood was below the Kahovka dam, not above it. So the Ukrainians, while they might be able to cross it here, they would be on an open plain, easy to be shot at from the Russian Air Force and the Russian artillery. That doesn't mean it's going to be impossible, but it's definitely going to be difficult. And it's in a serious extension of the front line, which will have effects on both sides, because now basically the river that is here is extending up here. So the distance to cross, it was more or less impossible to cross here with serious forces, but now it might come closer, so both sides will have to send additional forces along the shore to make sure the other side does not penetrate or does not cross the Dnipro above the former Kahovka dam. The British Ministry of Defense is saying, though, what I reported a week ago, that according to the information I found, the Russians have moved a serious amount of the forces in Kherson to Zaporizhzhia. So the Russians are reinforcing the front line here, where the Ukrainians keep up pressure with forces from Kherson. Whether this will allow the Ukrainians to cross the Dnipro now as the water level is going down again is unclear. It might open an opportunity, but it's far too early to say that this will actually open a window for them. Strelkov, for instance, Igor Girkin said, while it's difficult, the Ukrainian side has received so much river crossing equipment that it's very well possible the river has been crossed countless times in the last century, whether it be the Russian Civil War, whether it be World War II, it has been crossed and it's possible to cross it, and it should not be ruled out that the Ukrainians will be able to cross it as well. We have a video too from I have a better video from the storage, from the rail yard in Rykove. This is pretty impressive as it shows us the damage that was taken after that strike, likely with storm shadows, and you can see the massive demolition of the whole area, showing that those buildings were likely, at least some of them, filled to the brim with ammunition that blew up. This should impede the Russian ability to supply their units on the southern front line. While the railway line might be opened in a couple of days, the lost supplies here will hurt the Russians and will clearly hurt the Russians. We have reports from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense that the attacks happening here north of the Siversky Donetsk are mostly Storm Z. So it's those convicts that have been recruited into the Russian armed forces. They are being used here for for the Russian attacks. And if we summarize the situation, we cannot see any successes by either side when it comes to the control of territory. This is confirmed by both sides. We have the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Malya here, who said that fighting is continuing and so on. Our troops conducted offensive action and had partial success. Now they are fixed at the achieved boundary. So while she claims there were some successes in the past, right now there is no movement. And we have the same from the other side. Slatkov, a Russian journalist slash propagandist, who said here that anything isn't successful, and he even mentions it's relatively quiet along the front line. The Russians are also claiming here that we see here in RV Venkor that the Ukrainian results on their losses in heavy equipment is supposedly that they switch over to infantry heavy attacks, obviously leading to higher losses in infantry. Whether that is true or not can obviously not be easily confirmed from outside, but we can take that we can see the Russians mentioning it and maybe keep an eye on it, of this supposed development. When we talk about infantry heavy, it seems a good point to mention an article that is being spread around. It's in German here, but it's an article by a German journal about Leopard 2s and their soldiers. And there it mentions, they talk about the battle and how good the tank is and so on. But there's also a small mentioning that some fake damages to their tanks to avoid going to battle. And the soldiers even acknowledge that it's understandable, and it's even better if they fake going into battle than freaking out while in battle. And also at the same time, we see the Russian channels, especially on Telegram, handing around interviews with prisoners of war, claiming basically that everything's horrible on the Ukrainian side and the Ukrainian side more or less has lost. Now, we have no reason to think that this is untrue in this case here, that some Ukrainian tankers don't fake damages to avoid going to battle. This is fairly normal in combat, and we've reached a point that even while the Ukrainian armed forces are likely still highly motivated, it's still the question of an individual if he wants to go to battle, where he can expect sizable chance of getting killed or maimed. That some of them then try to avoid this is a human thing that we see, by the way, on the Russian side as well, where we also have numbers of deserters being mentioned, etc. Just to put this into some historic perspective, I've read reports both from Stalingrad as well as from the Battle of the Selo Heights. So one time where the German pocket in Stalingrad was about to be wiped out, and the other time less than a month before the complete capitulation of the Third Reich. In both cases, Russian soldiers switched sides, gave themselves up to the Germans to avoid fighting. One time, days before the Germans capitulated in Stalingrad, the other time right before the end of the war, less than a month. If we see this in a historic perspective, it shouldn't be a surprise of us that some of the things mentioned might actually be true. Some Ukrainian soldiers will prefer lifting their hands and going into becoming a Russian prisoner of war than going into combat, where they might be killed and where they might be maimed. This is obviously happening from the other side too. We've seen videos about this in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean that the stories they tell are necessarily untrue or that they are necessarily true. The point I can make here is that those stories the prisoners of war are telling are not really usable. They might be true, they might not be, as we have no way of making sure that this was representative, I think, depiction of the actual situation by a Ukrainian prisoner of war or by a Russian on that hand, because we have the same interviews from the Ukrainian side that also has Russian soldiers telling how bad it is. Generally, in the overall understanding, it would be that the Ukrainian side is much higher motivated, but it shouldn't surprise anyone that either side now and then has some with a faint of heart, I think is the expression, where they rather prefer to become prisoners of war than die. Where we are talking about this, we also can talk about the other story, that is War Gonzo. Now, you might have seen that video from Ukrainian special forces that were able to flank a trench and enter it from behind. They kill several Russian soldiers there that are actually unarmed, but all but one don't show any remote sign of capitulating, and even the one is like only having his hands forward, not upwards, and he's running out, so it might very well not be a capitulation. We have two interesting things about this fighting. The first was Ribar, the big Russian propaganda channel, claimed that those soldiers were unarmed because they weren't handed their weapons. That supposedly in a lot of units it's still practice that you have a central storage of arms and the soldiers need to go there to pick up their arms when the fighting begins, that they have limited ammunition because they are untrusted. So in this regard, they were actually trying to get to their weapons after having been surprised, which would obviously be highly concerning for the Russian side, as it would be a depiction either of gross incompetence or of actually them being afraid of their own soldiers. So they rather not have them have weapons than being able to defend themselves. Now, this one, we see the picture here on the left side. We see him coming into the picture and then getting shot. And right now, the rumors are that it was Semyon Pegov, the person who is the creator of War Gonzo, because there are some similarities. As of now, I don't see any proof of this. It wouldn't be the first time that we hear that somebody has died from either side. Usually it's the Russians claiming that Zaluzhny is dead, that Budanov, the GUR head, is dead. This time we have the pro-Ukrainian side claiming that Semyon Pegov is dead. I would not be surprised if we see him fairly soon in a new video, maybe even mocking that thing. But it might still be possible because he goes to the front line now and then. It could theoretically at least be possible that he was actually surprised in this. But as of now, we don't know. Anyone claiming anything else as of now, I think I have not seen any serious confirmation of this. So this is wild rumors. And in the end, the time we wasted on this is already unnecessary, because whether Semyon Pegov is dead or not doesn't make any difference, unlike Zaluzhny or Budanov's dead would make. The GUR, as we mentioned, Budanov, the GUR said the Russians have now mined the cooling system of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Now, I'm not completely sure where exactly they are supposed to have placed mines and whether this would actually cause a nuclear spill out, whether that would actually mean that nuclear particles are being spread around, but there is no rational reason to mine the nuclear power plant's cooling system whatsoever. There simply isn't. As said before, it might be a war crime to blow up the dam, but I can see a military point in this. If the Ukrainian side is doing a massive river crossing over the Dnipro and they're threatening to push through here, that you then blow up the dam and flood them and let them drown makes perfect sense, even if this leads to civilian losses, even if this leads to own losses. This wouldn't be the first time the Russians did it on the Dnipro itself. They actually blew up a dam in World War II, letting their own civilians and soldiers drown to prevent the Germans to cross it. So this would make sense, but there is no reason why you would mine a cooling tower, a cooling plant of the cooling system of a nuclear power plant, except for pure terrorism. I cannot see, if this is true, I cannot see any reasonable reason why you would mine it. Then again, of course, we have to say if this is true, because it's the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, which has a vested interest in framing situations and giving us an impression of the opposite side that is beneficial to the Ukrainian cause. But that doesn't mean they are wrong. And so far, they are not known for lying through their teeth whenever they talk. Still, we need to be somewhat cautious about informations from them, but generally, should this be true, I cannot see a rational reason to do that except planning to do scorched earth, basically terrorism. We have informations about the VBIEDs that have been used here south of Marinka. According to Russian claims on Telegram, they were actually not remotely piloted. Or if you want it this way, the way of remotely piloting is somebody climbing in and basically putting a brick on the gas pedal. That seems to have been the way of having those VBIEDs running into the Ukrainian front line. And there was another long rant from Prigozhin about the situation along the front line, where he claimed that the Ukrainians are far further advanced than they currently are, and the losses are horrible, and the supply is horrible. And basically, he's saying if the Russians don't pay attention, then the Ukrainians will be on the Crimean Peninsula fairly soon. I think while there is surely some truth to it when it comes to the Russian situation, we need to see that rant that is currently being quoted all over the internet. If we talk about that rank, we clearly need to see it in the context of his power struggle, of his private feud with Shoigu, with the Russian defense minister. If right now, without his troops on the front line, he has a vested interest of making the situation look as bad as possible, because even exaggerating, because the worse the situation is, the more incompetent Shoigu is, the more likely the chances that Shoigu might be replaced and somebody else is being used, is being promoted to the position of defense minister, and Shoigu is placing himself at that position, trying to get that post very likely for several months right now. So while the rant of Prigozhin surely will hold some truth, we should not take it too serious, as we can see the context it is being said in. It's not about him gaining some individual supply along the front line or something like this. This is a pure context of the political feud when it comes to his power struggle in the Russian context. There are informations about the mobilization, if you want it this way. Now, I don't really know that site here. We have no idea from when those videos are, but supposedly this is showing us Ukrainian. Okay, this is showing us. I'm sorry. Okay, I had some trouble with the player, whatever. What you see here, supposedly those are illegal immigrants that are being rounded up in Russia and being arrested. This doesn't make too much sense in the current situation, except for one reason. Now, the reports are that the unemployment rate is at really low point at this right now in Russia, which makes perfect sense after up to 1 million have fled the country and hundreds of thousands are being pressed into the armed forces. That obviously leads to young people missing in the workforce. At that point, illegal immigrants that are working should be useful. There's only one reason I can see of this happening, is that they are being threatened with deportation while they are being offered to get the Russian passport inside the Russian armed forces. As I've reported on this channel in the past, the Russian president has signed laws that allows foreigners to become Russian citizens by signing a contract with the Russian armed forces. So we see here it seems to be mostly men or only men. In that context, it would make perfect sense that this is meant to be part of the recruitment drive that is currently happening, trying to get immigrants to fight Russia's war. We have in the political sphere, the France seems to intend to back Ukraine's NATO bid as a means to put pressure on Russia to find a diplomatic solution. I somehow doubt that this is going to work, but at least this is being reported that France will support Ukraine's attempt to join NATO. And we have from the US, no, this was not it. We have here. Okay, sorry, I got a little confused here. We have from the US, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in China and talked to the Chinese dictator Xi Jinping. And in his talks, he emphasized how important it is that Russia doesn't receive lethal aid from China. And supposedly he was told that China doesn't right now and doesn't intend to support lethal weapons to Russia. And so far, the US don't have proof of that either. There are some minor things like drones that are being delivered, in quotation mark hunting rifles, but it's very small amounts, likely from private companies. It's definitely not that the People's Liberation Army is opening their depots and handing out shells and weapons to Russia in a big scale as of yet. And at least as of now, the US claims they're confident that this is not going to happen anytime soon either. There's further rumoring about the Merkavas that were up for grabs, at least according to the recent reports. What is going on here? At least according to the recent reports. So initially it was said that Israel is shortly before signing a contract to sell 200 or more Merkava 2 and Merkava 3 to two countries, one of them in Europe. The likely reason for that was to give weaponry to Ukraine, as the Merkava supposedly has some components that need US signature to be sold abroad. In this case, now the latest rumor is that Cyprus and Morocco are the purchasing nations. Cyprus to hand over its T-80U or UK to Ukraine, and Morocco to hand over its T-72B. While this would make perfect sense, those are tanks that can immediately be used by the Ukrainian armed forces. They are used to those systems. They have the ammunition for it. They have spare parts for it. It's unclear whether this is actually proceeding, because the latest rumors now from today are that supposedly the Israelis have said that the negotiations have stopped and are cancelled. I have not found any confirmation whatsoever of this. I researched it before this video, but I cannot confirm neither that it's actually Cyprus and Morocco buying them, because any report I found was from sources I don't fully trust, nor can I confirm that the sale is cancelled. But at least if it's happening, it seems almost certain that this will mean tanks for Ukraine, even though giving Ukraine Merkava seems extremely unlikely, as Israel doesn't want to provoke Russia too much. There is a report about additional help for Ukraine. The US have calculated the aid that was given to Ukraine in the past, and they took the full sum, like they had to buy the new tanks. And the stream technician comes, I apologize. So for them it is basically, you have to understand that an M113 that is rotting in some depot, that is in some depot, did cost a certain amount when it was built in 1970. And according to the bookkeeping, they calculated like it was sold, like it was freshly produced. This is obviously nonsense, as the M113 is not going to be replaced with a new M113. It was meant to be discarded, and it was meant to be replaced by a much more modern AFV. By now realizing this, they recalculated the sums, and this will lead to an additional 6.2 billion that were already confirmed in aid but not delivered, as the items delivered were assumed to be more valuable than they actually were, which means that basically there is already a fully legal budget of an additional 6.2 billion in help, in financial aid, in military aid for Ukraine. The other thing is a very weird story from Hungary. Now, Russia apparently has handed over 11 Ukrainian prisoners of war to Hungary. Those are from Transcarpathia, which is a former Hungarian area inside of Ukraine. This is more or less this here. This has either a sizable Hungarian, ethnic Hungarian minority, or it's even majority Hungarian. I'm not completely sure, and it doesn't really matter too much. The thing is that nationalists inside of Hungary also claim that territory, as they claim, for instance, this part of Romania, as Hungary has a lot of Hungarians. The Hungarian people are spread out over several neighboring states after the breakup of the Hungarian kingdom after 1918. And this is an area that is historically claimed by Hungary. So the people there speak Hungarian, are ethnic Hungarians, but they are Ukrainian citizens, and thus they fight in the Ukrainian armed forces if they have been recruited or if they have volunteered. And the story now is that 11 of those have suddenly appeared inside of Hungary. Whether it was a private initiative of some churches, whether it was with involvement of the government isn't unclear. I found claims that Hungary doesn't allow the Ukrainian authorities to talk to them. They say the Ukrainians should be happy that they got free at all. Now 3 seem to be returning to Ukraine. It seems unclear what the current situation is, but it's obviously not creating a lot of fans for Hungary if apparently there are some private negotiations between the two countries, especially in the context that that the Hungarian nationalists want to extend their country into neighboring Ukraine as well. Back to international support, we have a report from Hensoldt. Where is it? I have it here. Hensoldt is a German tech company that does mostly electronics for military usage, radar systems, for instance, and they are going to equip Ukrainian helicopters with new self-protection sensors. This is obviously extremely important. If helicopters are being shot at with missiles, be it manpads, be it SAM systems, regular SAM systems, they have usually 2 guidance systems, that is infrared and that is radar, and you need appropriate sensors to realize that you're being targeted, to allow evasive maneuvers, to allow the usage of chaff and flare. And for that, you need sensors that either identify radar lock that is being done on the helicopter, or you need infrared sensors that identify a missile from its burn, from its heat that is closing in onto the helicopter. And supposedly Hensoldt is going to help the Ukrainians equip their helicopters with that system, which should increase the survivability of Ukrainian helicopters. The Italians are reporting that there is now SAMPT in Ukraine. That's the air defense system that France and Italy have both use. It can somewhat be compared with the Patriot. I think the overall range is a little shorter, but it is one of the few systems that is certified to shoot down ballistic missiles. So it will help Ukraine defend its airspace as well. And now it's being confirmed as being in use in Ukraine. We have reports from Lockheed. Lockheed says they are going to help supply and help run the F-16 should Ukraine receive some. These reports here are that they are willing to help training. They even are willing to sell new F-16s. Basically, Lockheed says we are willing to help Ukraine, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise because they are not going to help them on their own dime, but by receiving payment for that. But still, I guess it's good news for Ukraine that Lockheed is willing to commit itself to supply spare parts and even new F-16s if there's a permission to do so. We have pictures from mock-ups were being spread around lately, a couple of weeks ago mostly. Those were actually taken in the United States. It shows different air defense systems. This is a Tor short-range air defense system. This is an S-300 likely being used here. I think at least it should be S-300. The question was, why are they being used there? Are they being produced to be handed over to the Ukrainians to use them as decoys? I actually found a very interesting interpretation of this in a Russian source. The Rebar founder said that they are being used to train artificial intelligence in recognizing the systems. That's why having them as accurate as possible was necessary, so AI can find it. Whether that will be used for targeting, for actually targeting weapons, or just for identifying it on, for instance, aerial surveillance pictures is a different question, but his explanation was it's going to be used for AI targeting. And we have reports from Lithuania that they are handing over all their helicopters. That cannot be true because they have 2 Mi-17 and I think 3 Black Hawks. It seems unlikely that they're going to hand over their Black Hawks. It seems more likely that they are going to give Ukraine their Mi-17s, which are slated to be replaced with Black Hawks anyways. So they just basically pushed forward that delivery. And finally, we have a video here of Russian fortification work that is still continuing, and it shows a drone that is hitting it but not exploding, and you see the people running away. But what is fairly interesting is the way it's being constructed. Now we have dragon teeth in front of this here being placed. We have a tank ditch, and in front of it we have another row of dragon teeth. But what really surprised me was that there's a tree line here. Now with the earth being moved here to the right side, if it's built properly, the enemy should be on the left side. It should be the attacker should come from the left of this picture. Otherwise, he can just use a shovel that is in front of the tank and basically fill up the tank ditch. And so you need to have the earth mount on your own side, not on the enemy side. But that would mean that the Russians are building a fortification line right next to a tree line, which offers at the very least concealment to Ukrainians, where they can hide in, where they can reorganize attacks, where they might even close in without being seen. Is if we see anti-tank defenses, which all those three R's, then we would expect the Russians to consider it's possible for tanks to cross through that tree line, and then it doesn't make any sense. Now, either this is safe from tanks, then you can build a fortification behind it, but then you don't need anti-tank defense, or this is the Ukrainians might actually come, but they might come without being spotted, without the Russian soldiers that should then be somewhere up here being able to target them with anti-tank guided missiles until they've crossed in, or the whole system here is built the wrong way, that the enemy is actually up here and they mistakenly put the earth mount on the side where it shouldn't be, which would allow the Ukrainians to fill it up. That at least would explain why they make the immediate second row of dragon teeth in front of it, as it would probably be too difficult to move the earth to the other side. So they say it's too late now, let's at least build a row of dragon teeth in front of it here. But we see what the efforts the Russians put in, and we see that there are some inconsistencies that can only be explained that in a way that the persons making those defensive lines have no clue whatsoever they are doing, and pocketing money for a mission to do something without really having a clue what they are doing. That was it from me for now. If you enjoyed this situation report, please hit the thumbs up, leave a comment for the algorithm, and say what you think about, do you think the Ukrainians will be able to cross the Kahovka reservoir, or now the Dnipro? Do you think they will do this? This really helps with the algorithm, and if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so this channel can keep growing and you don't miss anything. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.